Ken Renee is joining now, so once she's on and available, you can get started.
So Higdon is out tonight. I think he's at some sort of conference for his business, so I'll be filling in. Thank you guys for making it to the meeting. I guess I'll toss it over to Hazen to get us started.
All right, thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. Very excited about tonight, and a lot of us have heard a lot of this before, but this budgeting forecasting model really puts the capital improvements plan and kind of future budget needs all in one capsulized spreadsheet that is interactive, and we can take things out and put things in and calculate the tax rate. It's really a beautiful piece of artwork, Becky, and I've said that a bunch, but I really feel that way. So Becky's going to lead this tonight, and I think we'll have a good discussion. We have 3 hours. I don't know if Becky wants to take the full 3 hours, but take it away, Becky.
Thanks, Hazen, and good evening, everybody. And no, you won't have to hear me the entire time tonight. So Charissa will also be chatting with you a little bit, but certainly appreciate the opportunity. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things tonight. It's a lot of information, but kind of the hope for tonight is think of it as sort of a primer or a jumping off point for the larger discussion that we'll be having at the planning conference in about a month. So a lot of this is to provide some context to help understand the landscape as we understand it currently, both with operating pressures that we either know are coming because we have committed to them or we anticipate that we will need them, in addition to our improvements plan and the vast number of projects.
Made it in and out. Did Becky, was Becky okay for y'all? Okay, so
yeah. Still on her video feed.
Yeah. Yes, it's fading in and out, and also her screen is not clear too. Her vision not really clear.
All right, I just switched to a different. How is that? Can y'all hear me okay?
I'm a little confused. I'm seeing two different things, but I'm down for February 8th. I just want to make sure.
Okay. All right. I'm going to keep my camera off then, and hopefully that's a little bit better. I do have another internet option. If that doesn't work, I apologize for that. But the intention tonight is to focus on capital improvements plan and the number of projects that we do not have an identified funding source for. Of course, the American Rescue Plan Act and loosened strings could be one option for some of those, but bonds is also another thing to consider. So we want to spend some time providing a primer of what goes into a bond referendum process and the decisions that would have to be made, some of the timing we're looking at, and then start to take a look at some of the projects that might be a good option for that. So as I start to share my screen, I won't be able to see you anymore. So if you have any questions, please just feel free to interrupt, and I'm happy to stop as necessary. So as Hazen mentioned, this is our budget forecasting model. Some of you have seen this before. Some of you, this may be the first time, but this was put together about 18 months ago. And the intention of the budget forecasting model was to be able to start to understand the impacts of property valuation increases, revaluation, increases to sales tax, all of the revenue sources that we have in any given year, and then understand the increases to our operating budget that is going to naturally happen through just the general increase in the cost of doing business and the increases that come with being able to provide annual merit increases to our employees, and then the additional operational needs that we anticipate taking on. So again, some things that are on this list are sort of locked in that we have already committed to this funding, whereas others are when we anticipate them being needed or when we anticipate things coming online. There is some ability to shift depending on what it is to perhaps relieve pressure in a given year, but then we're able to understand what pressure does that create in a future year and how things can sort of snowball if we push things off too much. So as Hazen mentioned, this is a live model. And so the intention is to be able to help facilitate what if scenarios and conversations of if we do this year, what does that do to the needed tax rate, and to really help understand it. So as it is presently built, it does not have any additional desired capital improvements plans in them, or if we were to do a bond referendum, what that tax impact would be. We're able to plug all of those in once we have that information, but it does not currently contain. So just a little bit of the lay of the land. We're currently, of course, in fiscal year 22, and we have a tax rate of 29.5 cents. And so we have built in forecasts for where we think we are going to be with sales tax that is currently trending better than budgeted, which is always great to have. And so we have an anticipated update to our revenues for the current fiscal year. And then down here is everything that was already approved in the current budget. These are things that we are working with now, working to fill these positions. As we look over to 23, and I'll show some of the items here in a moment, but this is the budget that we are just getting started on putting together, that you will see a proposed budget in 23. But as we start to program in the things that we know are coming or some things that we would like to see, we are already anticipating that we are going to have pressure on that 29.5 cent tax rate. We understand that our job over the next few months is to whittle that down so that the plan is that we're bringing you a balanced budget still at the 29.5 cent tax rate. But what this is saying to us is we know that we've got our work cut out for us to be able to reduce anticipated expenditures to keep ourselves where we currently are, to then be heading into reval, which I'll talk to about in just a minute. So as we look at 23, just to let you know, we previously agreed to replace Rescue 8. And so we will be taking on some debt to make those annual payments. And then the prior board approved the purchase of 3 properties. And we do anticipate taking on some debt to be able to pay back our fund balance. And then we would be making annual payments on those properties. Those properties include the Fire Station 3 location, 335 East Matthews near Town Hall, as well as Matthews School Road for the future Greylock Ridge extension. And these are also projects that in the packet that was provided to you, there is a description of everything that is listed in this budget forecasting model. These are 2 examples of items that have been identified that if the board wanted to consider for the ARPA funds, these are the kind of one-time expenses that can wipe out the need to take on this debt, which would relieve pressure from our budget. But we understand that that will be a bigger conversation in February. But we do have additional pressures coming in 23, where we are looking to increase the number of police cars that we fund every year. We currently fund 7. We would be looking to bring it up to 9 in 23, add an additional 10th vehicle every year in 24. And then this is a really painful one. A couple months ago, the board had to make an adjustment to the budget for health insurance premiums because of some increases that we had sort of last minute notice on. So this is really just getting us fully funded in 23. We anticipate the budget to go up a minimum of $320,000. That does not include the annual increase to premiums that we will inevitably see as part of that plan. And then we do have some increases right now that are plugged into our capital improvements plan. These would also be an opportunity to maybe think about spending ARPA on some of these. An update to our emergency operations center is one of them. But this is all kind of subject to change as we go through preparation for the FY23 budget. But we are also hoping that next year we will be able to fund a classification and compensation study for human resources that will really line us up for 24 to know where we need to move the pay plan in order to be in the competitive placement that we would like to be. And then I know this is very important to our planning department. We are due for a comprehensive plan update, and we do anticipate that to be a one-time, perhaps as much as $150,000 expense. So bottom line, all of those things are going to be putting pressure on our 23 budget. But what this model is able to also do is look ahead to 24. So that is when we will have our next revaluation. And speaking with the county last year, they are anticipating at least a 20% increase to our property values. And so that does create an opportunity, if the board wants to take it, to be able to fit more into our budget every year at essentially the same tax rates, because the property valuations are now higher. So you collect more taxes off of the increased values. But I know a major point of discussion that we have had is Fire Station 3. This would be a great opportunity to bring the debt service online for that fire station if ARPA is not something that is pursued for that cost. The DeVore property for the future park development is also one that we will need to take out some debt to pay ourselves back for that property if we don't pursue ARPA for that expense. And our ladder truck is actually coming up due for replacement as well. This is an example of something that if we wanted to move it to a future year, you may have an opportunity to extend it out, but you can only do that so many years before eventually it has to be replaced. So we do have a lot that we anticipate in 24 because of that revaluation opportunity. Again, we talked about the additional police car that would then be funded in future years automatically. We do anticipate needing to add additional patrol officers and an increase to our human resources staff as they take on more requirements related to recruiting and training for the organization in particular. Paving is another one that you heard about the other week, and the need to fully fund that program. We are currently underfunding it approximately $500,000 a year, and the reval can be an opportunity to get that straightened out and then funded at that full amount in future years. We anticipate some additional needs to either more paving or more people to do some paving work in public works. GIS continues to be a needed service that is increasing in needs for all of our departments. So we anticipate being able to justify that moving that to a full-time position would work out in FY24, an additional police telecommunicator, and then increased work in our communications efforts to make sure that we are providing as much information and in the format that is best received by our community. We expect expansions in that area, some increases to our IT budgets, and then some additional increases in public works related to concrete and landscape. The big mover here is 15 firefighters. As the fire station comes online, you heard about Rob's vision for a hire and then train type model. And so we would need to take on those additional employees before the station was actually ready to open, to have them up and running on their skills and certifications before the station were to be fully online. And then we do anticipate that we are low in our pay plan. And this is a placeholder to try to anticipate and budget for some changes that we expect will be happening with the pay plan. And I won't go line by line here, but these are some additional one-time costs that we anticipate being able to hopefully fit in the reval. And the good news is we also have some debt rolling off in FY24. We will have approximately $424,000 in debt rolling off that will help absorb some of these additional costs that we expect to be coming on in the year. So happy to answer any questions about this. I do want to point out, I know that there are varying degrees of interest in it, but this model is also intended to be able to work in if the board wanted to look at other sources of revenue, such as a solid waste fee, and what that can do to relieve the tax burden if the board wanted to investigate options like that. So this is meant to just be a working model. And as we move forward with discussions, it's something that we can bring back out and plug things in and see what it does to tax rates. And we can move things around if the board wants to see things in different years. It's really meant to be useful as we have conversations around those areas. So with that, I will keep moving if there are no questions. But I do encourage, if you didn't get a chance to read it ahead of time, we did provide just sort of an overview of the anticipated departmental needs that we see on the operational front, as well as the descriptions of all of the items that are in that budget forecasting model. And as you look through it, you'll notice that just tried to call out some of those one-time costs that when the board has a larger discussion about ARPA, these are the types of
Becky, I think you went out again.
think about, and certainly if there's an opportunity.
Becky, you froze up there for probably 30 plus seconds.
Yep. Sorry, guys. How's that? Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm on a different connection. Hopefully it will hold. I apologize. So I'm not sure where I cut out, but just encouraging you to look through this and try to highlight the ARPA funding projects that would be one-time costs if the board wants to consider them as you discuss it more thoroughly in February. Anything that you did decide to fund with ARPA from this list certainly provides relief to our general fund budget, which is very helpful in either keeping the tax rate low, period, or creating more capacity if you are interested in pursuing a bond referendum. It may be able to achieve the bond referendum at a lower total impact on the tax rate if some of these other things are relieved. So the other thing that we wanted to put together that I know many of you have seen before, but these are the budget capital improvements plan worksheets. And the purpose of these is to really just be able to collect and put in one place all of the significant projects that are considered capital improvements projects in the various types of buckets, the various types of projects, to understand when certain things are expected to come online, when certain financial obligations will have to be met, and then projects that have no known funding source that may be good to pursue with a bond, or it may be something to just put on the back burner and think about in future years. These are constantly updated, engineering and public works in particular, as DOT continues to try to figure out what they're doing. There's a lot of moving parts with these, but we did try to capture as many of the known increases in costs that we can nail down, as well as changes in timing. Of course, a lot of the DOT projects, as an example, have been pushed out and are now in some cases well beyond the 2029 year that this currently goes to. But we can certainly provide any written descriptions for any of these projects that the board is interested in knowing about. But what we like to look at as you go through all of them is this is a compilation of all types of projects and all funding sources. And this is the number that we always look at that gets us. So as currently listed, all of the projects that we are aware of, there are approximately 62 million in projects that we do not have a funding source for, or we do not have timing for. And so the purpose of the bond discussion is to think about which of these projects you may want to move from here and start being able to plug in to some of these years coming up if we are able to have a successful bond referendum process and be able to start knocking some of those projects out and achieving some of those things that we know you would like to see done. So these projects are typically not ones that we would anticipate being able to fund through natural growth. So it would take some other type of funding mechanism, either just a general increase in a tax rate or a bond referendum process to be able to have the funds to accomplish some of these things, really most of them.
Becky,
Yes.
I believe Mark has a question.
Sure.
Folks, if you have questions, feel free to interrupt. Becky can't see you right now, so you can just go ahead and ask.
Hi, Becky. If you scoot back up a little bit on the to be determined portion, oops, the other way. Yeah, thanks. Are those figures at the end? Are those in today's dollars?
Most of them are, yes. So it's a great point. I appreciate you pointing that out. So back about 18 months ago and working with Susan Woolard, she had originally tried to provide cost estimates with an anticipated funding year of 2025, as the costs of many things have just wildly escalated. At this point, the numbers that we have provided, we do think are in today's dollars. But I appreciate you pointing that out, because that is something that, as the bond referendum discussions move forward, building in enough buffer to the total project cost is going to be very important to make sure that whatever number is ultimately put up to the community, if the board does move forward with a bond referendum, that we have enough built in there that we can actually accomplish that project for the amount that is asked for. I know Charlotte, as an example, ran into some trouble with some of their greenways previously, and that is something that we certainly want to do everything in our power to avoid. So yes, that 62 million is today's dollars. So you would be adding significantly to that depending on when it is ultimately funded.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. So with that, we now want to spend some time, and I'm going to turn it over to Teresa really providing a primer on bond referendums in North Carolina and the steps that if you choose to go down this path, what we have in front of us. So with that, I will turn it over to Teresa.
Thank you, Becky, and good evening, everyone. So now we're just gonna talk a little bit about bond referendums and kind of what that really means and what that is. So a bond referendum is basically when we give the voting, it's the voting process that we give the power to decide over to the citizens. They decide whether we should be authorized to do the projects that are listed with a bond package. And the thing about a bond referendum is when you put it to a vote, we are pledging our full faith and credit. We're pledging the taxing power. So we are saying that if the citizens approve this bond referendum and bond packages, and we go out and we issue the bonds, that we will raise taxes to pay the debt. This is one of the few, key things about a bond referendum is that you are pledging your taxing power. But the purpose of a bond referendum is to ask the voters and ask the citizens, do you feel this is an important project? Do you feel this is something that the town should do? But it's a lengthy process, but it's a process that gets the public involved. It gets the voters involved, and it gives them an opportunity to voice their opinion on what they feel like is a priority for their town. So, if you all decide that you're ready to, this is something you want to do, you're ready to put together a bond package, that's not going to happen overnight. We have listed the steps for a bond referendum here. And this is a lengthy list, and some of them are not just, a simple, easy step to check off. There are a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross if you want to put a bond referendum out to the voters. I definitely won't bore you by reading this whole list, but you will note that, as Becky said, the cost estimates and the timing is important because we're not gonna be able to do all of these projects at once. And we have up to 7 years from the time it's approved to issue all the bonds. But you've got to go through this whole set of steps, which is going to take us about 6 months to even get to the point where we can put it out for a vote to the citizens. So we can't decide in October that we want a bond referendum on the ballot in November, because that's just not going to happen. So you have to, which is why we're bringing it to you now. We're bringing it to you early so you can think about it, you can consider it, because bond referendums are held only either in even year primary, where there's a primary or a general election, which would be, the next one would be November of 2022, because that is a midterm election, or it can be held on the odd number of years that the municipalities that we are having a general election. But we can't just call for a special voting time for bond referendums. They must appear on a ballot that is already scheduled to go out for other elections that are taking place, and it must be open to all of the citizens in the town, and it must be a general election. And kind of as I had mentioned, we do have 7 years. You can get that extended by 3 years to take a total of 10 years to issue the bonds. You don't have to issue all the bonds at once. The example we gave is if we did a $20 million bond package. We could issue our $20 million at once, or we can break it down into smaller projects and issue them in increments of $5 million at a time, which is more manageable. And that way we can stagger the start of some of the projects because we're not going to be able to get everything started at once. And then we have 20 years to pay back the bonds once they're issued. So there are some best practices, as with, everything else. We should leave room to absorb the cost escalations, which, we seem to kind of be beating that in everybody's heads. But in today's economy, that is a very volatile thing. I mean, one day it's up, the next day it's down, the next day it jumps up twice as much. You should prioritize capital projects that are one-time events, not something that is going to keep occurring. And you should avoid asking for projects that you really can't afford to have them say no, because we really need to do it anyway. Kind of like some discussion has already been said, like the fire department. We all feel pretty confident that most people would say, yes, we want a fire department. But if the people said no, but we really do need a fire department and we build it anyway, then you have put the town, in a position where the citizens said, but we said no. So you kind of want to avoid those situations, and you want to avoid expending political goodwill on projects that that you know that the community is likely to have overwhelming support and that you already have a strong desire to pursue. So if you already know you really want to do a project, regardless of what a vote would be, those are not the projects to put out there. And then you also want to avoid asking for projects that have a high likelihood of failure. Don't ask for those things that you pretty much know that most of the citizens are going to say, no way, we do not want to pay for that. Because if the voters don't approve the bonds that you've asked for, we will kind of go back to the drawing board, and you can either postpone or eliminate some projects, or if the projects are critical, we could just, you as a board could decide to fund them through alternative means. And again, this may get some negative feedback from the public because they just said no. And we talked about the taxing implications, and we have included an exhibit that kind of gives you some projected tax implications. Yeah, as Becky's bringing that up, that shows bond referendum potentials using the current 2020 property tax valuations, and then using the estimated increase in 2024. And then we've looked at it from a 1.5% interest rate to a 2.5% interest rate. So as you can see, worst case scenario is values stay the same as they are now, and we have 2.5% interest on given this particular bond package, and we would have a 7.6% tax increase. And then, the best case scenario is a 1.5% interest rate at the 2020, and the 2024 values are what we estimate, and it would be a 5.6 tax increase. And we've also given out there in the farthest column in each color category, the tax implication based on a $400,000 home using the 2024 valuation. So you can see how much a citizen's property tax would increase at each given tax rate increase.
Teresa, Mark here, I have a question on this table. The amortization schedule appears to be based on the issue principal. for instance, if we take the 2 million and we have an annual debt service of 117,000, where is the brokerage fees in there, and how has the discount for that been accounted for?
Okay. I'm not
So I can
sure.
put that. So Mark, those have not been built into this at this point in time. So the intention of this was to start to just provide some ballparking for the board to be able to look at it and just get a sense of, you know, what does a $2 million bond package look like generally as far as the tax implication compared to a 20 million or a 40 million or a 60 million. So we do expect these to fluctuate a little bit as we start to get more information on what some of those other costs are. But this was really just to help the board start to get a feel for, you know, what kind of spending power or what kind of tax implications you might have. So please don't take these as completely set in stone at this point in time.
Has there been any inquiries as what the current brokerage fee is for, say, within the next 3 months?
So no, we have a call in to a bond attorney. One of the, as far as we know, been described as one of the best ones in the state. So we do anticipate being able to have those conversations and have some of that information ready for the planning conference in a month.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Yes, so if we go back up into the descriptions, again, as Becky just noted there, these are the broad overviews of the basics of what is a bond referendum, what is involved, what does it look like. Again, the timing is the critical part because it takes so long to go through the whole process, because we do have to reach out. We have to talk to the people with the bond counsel attorney, and we have to go to the OGC, and they only have certain slots, and they make their calendar a year in advance, and you have to be able to work yourself into their schedule. And then elections are only held, you know, in November each year. So the section that talks about when does a decision need to be made, again, the school government recommends at least 6 months lead time so that we can get everything, make sure we get everything taken care of. So if a bond referendum is desired in this calendar year, the election day is November the 8th. So 6 months prior is May the 8th, which may seem like a long way away, but as we all know, that time flies by rather quickly. And again, the last time the town of Multiuse did a bond referendum was in 2004. And since it has been such a long time, the staff would desire to have as much time as possible so that a robust public information campaign can be put out there, so that the citizens are completely aware of what we're asking for. Of course, town employees can't advocate for, we can provide, you know, we can educate and provide educational information about what is involved in the bond packages. However, we as town staff and the town, you know, cannot advocate, vote yes, vote no. And so it takes some time to get the proper public information that is not perceived as trying to sway someone one way or the other. So the questions that we're kind of just putting out there to you all, for you all to start considering and thinking about and maybe talking, you know, amongst each other, is whether there is majority support to pursue any type of bond referendum this November, and what categories are you interested in moving forward with, whether it be parks and, you know, parks, or it's sidewalks or, things like that. And what projects would you like to see prioritized within categories? And then if there was a minimum bond package amount or related or a minimum tax increase cap that you would like to see on any one bond referendum category, and then as a total for all categories, kind of, how much are you willing to spend? How much do you want to spend? And then what, if any, additional information you need from staff to help you make these decisions? Because, at the end of the day, it's your decision, and we want to give you as much information as possible to help make your decision easier because you have all the information that you need.
Teresa, Mark again, what was the amount of the 2004 bond issue?
5.5 million, I think.
And
So
what?
I can help with that, Mr.
Oh, just one follow-up question to Hazen. What was the action that the board took at that bond issue in terms of tax increase?
Okay, so two good questions. So 2004, we had two bonds that were both passed about by the 2/3 majority. One was $5.5 million for widening South Trade Street, which we did. And then $5 million was for park acquisition. And we had the authorization for both of those, right? They got approved. And what we did with the Purser Halsey Park, because we worked a deal with the county where they granted us some money and we acquired the land. So we did not exercise, we did not sell the Parks and Recreation bonds. We just let them expire. So with the 2004, I believe we raised taxes $0.0125. We can find that. We can find that because it would have been about 2015 when we did that. So we'll make a note to find out that tax increase. And since you were there, was the public made aware in advance that there was going to be a tax increase because of the bond? Yes, I've always been a big, strong proponent of that, to keep everything clear, because while like boards may say, well, let's see what the budget's like then, and maybe we're going to be okay, we don't have to raise taxes. I think it's healthier to be transparent and say, okay, if you do $20 million, if it's, one penny raises $500,000, that's going to be, whatever, 4.5 cents or whatever the numbers are. I do think that's smart. And I don't think that's part of the language in the bond, but as far as promotional material, I think that's a smart way to do it. And then when you get to that point, the board may say, well, guess what? We got blah, 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 and we can raise it 3 cents and we're going to be fine. But, and as a staff, I drum that into the board because we have, significant board turnover. And every time I say, now don't forget, we talked about raising taxes $0.015 just to make sure, because boards, nothing against boards, but when it comes to it, it's like, man, we really don't want to raise these taxes. But sometimes you can put the organization in a hole because you're trying to, whatever, squeeze blood out of a turnip.
I agree with you on every one of those points. Hazen, is tonight's meeting, are we actually going to be considering these questions, or is this an overview to prepare us for the planning board?
Yes, sir. That's exactly right. So the way we see the planning conference coming up at the end of the month, and I want to talk with staff tomorrow, but in my mind, we talk about with you guys, y'all have a list, a laundry list of projects and estimates. And then that laundry list, you think about, okay, what do we want to use with ARPA funds, right? What do you want to use with the bond referendum? And then what can you absorb through the general tax base through the CIP, so that, you can have this big aggregate discussion. And what I like so much about what Becky's put together, as you, let's say, move things out of the CIP and put in the bond referendum, the tax rate changes, right? And so you kind of get to see this really interactive model and think through, okay, by 2025, a tax rate may be 35 cents or something like that.
Right. So you want to open up a general conversation right now, considering these questions. Is this correct?
It's really up to the board. We do have some of the projects that we have identified as perhaps the most eligible or the most attractive from a bond perspective. So we can go over those first, or we can open it up and the board can chat about these questions now. It's really your preference.
Hey, Hazen, is this going to be one of the main focal points as a part of the planning conference? So again, I don't know if we want to spend a significant amount of time discussing it as a board now, if we're going to spend it. I don't want to do double work for staff. You know, if you guys have more of a presentation to give, I say we kind of keep it moving.
Well, I think Becky, I think we're at the end of the presentation.
So
we've got one other section to go through.
Well, when we go into those other sections, if we can just kind of keep something in the back of our minds, is that we are in an historical of major proportions sweet spot, I call it. We have an incredibly low interest rate with a fast approaching, very rapidly rising inflationary rate. This would be a phenomenal opportunity to have bond referendum and to actually move those CIP expenditures into the bond, because we'd actually be making money on our bond because of the inflationary pressures that would be put on us by delaying capital expenditures. So anyway, having said that, that was just a general observation that made it extremely attractive to have a bond issue at this point in time.
Hazen, I had a question. When was the last time one of the 6 smaller towns in the county has issued a bond for a vote? I know we were 2004. Is there any evidence of other towns?
Well, I remember, it's funny, I'm not really sure. Well, I know one. So Mint Hill, I'm going to guess 5 or 6 years ago, they had a bond referendum to take the old elementary school and convert it to a community center. And that bond did not pass. I think it was relatively close, but it did not pass. We could find out from the northern towns what I don't know if Pineville's had anything, but we could find out just out of curiosity if that's what you're interested in.
Yeah, maybe give us some historical data.
Hazen, didn't Mint Hill, it was 2 years ago, didn't Mint Hill try and float the baseball bond for the ballpark, and it went down?
That's right. That was the other one. There was 2 of them. There were 2 questions. That was the other one. I couldn't remember it.
I personally, if we have time this evening, if we could find brackets of categories to help Becky and Teresa for the bonds, that would allow them to focus for the planning conference. And if we could rule out things that were, revolving expenses, which you don't want to create for a bond, if we can rule out things that you can't lose on, which we've talked about this, Ken, if we can do that very quickly, that will get them narrowed in, because the end of February in the planning conference, it tightens up very quickly on Teresa's schedule.
Yeah, I agree with that, John. Me and you have been talking about this for the last 3-4 years, is putting a bond. The 2 things that I'm most interested in a bond is streets, infrastructure, solid waste, sewer, and that type of thing. The next one, and this is things I'm asking, I believe that the people a selling point, is public safety, police department, fire department. Those 3 should be up at the top priority. And I know I heard Chief on both sides where we are, and we're talking about hiring new firefighters, and we got to have more police officers, but we got to be competitive. I believe the citizens of Matthews want the public safety, and they want better roads to make sure some of our old roads are updated and maintained. Those are my 3 top picks that I would like to see on a bond referendum. And I believe the citizens will support that.
So Commissioner Whitley, what I hear you saying, because like the fire station would be like salaries or police salaries can't go on a bond, but capital items could. A good example would be a fire station. Is that what you're saying would be a top priority for you?
Yeah, certainly. And I think that we had talked about the police department relocating as well too, because they, right as it stands now, they're not really secure if there was a severe threat to the police department. There are no really strong barricade that keeps somebody from just driving and into the building and such. But yeah, that's what I'm talking. That's what I mean, Hazel.
And we have hardened the police station, just for everybody on the call's edification. However, right, it's a manufacturing structure. It wasn't built as a fire station, but there's been a lot of, just in the last couple of years, significant improvements to the building.
Hazen, since we're coming up with possible tasks for staff, I'd like to see a scenario where everything is brought forward. In other words, what it would take to bring Public Works, Police, and Fire up to level 1 status all at once, and how that would affect the years outlying, because of the fact that with the inflation rate, how much money would we actually be saving long-term by doing that? And for instance, a classic example with CJ's Public Works, what would we be saving, if anything? And I'm asking this as a rhetorical question because I don't know at this point. The financial analysis hasn't been made. But what if the bond referendum were to bring everything to the 80% or above point for every road in town? How would that save us in the 10 to 15 year range in terms of road maintenance? So it's questions like that. In other words, what would it take if we put everything forward in the bond referendum for the fire department? All the capital expenditures that were to be made for the next 10 years were to be moved forward. How would that affect the profitability because of the inflationary rate? So I'd like to see that scenario where the Public Works, Fire, and Police, everything is moved forward in time to give a level 1 status, and how would that affect the cost of the town over the next 10 to 15 years in a positive way or a negative way? Thank you.
Gina, I believe you had your hand raised.
Gina had your hand raised. You still need to speak.
We can't hear you.
Okay, I mean, I understand the bond concept and all that. I'm kind of just concerned right now. I mean, do we know what the tax rate increase would be right now? Or is that something we'd have to learn at the time of the bond? And I'm just concerned with us in COVID, coming out of COVID. We have so many families that are suffering and still suffering, and that puts a great concern for me. And then I do agree with Commissioner Whitley, you know, the fire and police need to be top of the list. But it's just right now, I didn't know if we knew what the rate would be for, if we'd know yet.
Yeah, so great segue, thank you. And some of the projects that have been referenced. So what we have put together is the list of projects. So Commissioner Tufano, some of the things that you are mentioning are not things that have been discussed. So certainly that's something that we can look at in addition to these, but we did want to go ahead and put together things that we have at least previously identified. So this groups them in ways that we believe they could be grouped on a ballot question. So you have to group like projects with like projects. You can't, put out a bond referendum saying, give us $10 million for parks, and hidden in there is $4 million for a landfill. That's what they want to make sure is not happening. So you have to be very transparent about grouping like projects together. But Commissioner Hoover, to answer your question a little bit, the tax rate implications are completely contingent upon how large of a package you are requesting. And that is some of the questions that were on that other document that each of you as a board member is probably going to be approaching this a little bit differently. Some of you may have a maximum tax impact in mind that you just wouldn't be comfortable going higher than X cents. Well, that's going to drive, of course, how much could fit within that total amount. Some of you may be thinking about specific projects, and the cost is the cost. You really want to see those projects brought forward. So kind of the implications are what they are if you wanted to bring those forward. And others might be looking at a set budget and then sort of how much can we fit in, and if there's anything left over, that's great. So since all of you have sort of a different thought process, that's really, I think, what we want all of you to spend some time either talking about tonight, if you know, or thinking about it over the next 4 weeks, is what is your thought process? What is your comfort level? And is there a comfort level at all? You know, Commissioner Hoover, if that's something that you're not comfortable with, you know, we certainly don't have to move forward, and we won't move forward unless there is majority board support. But a lot of it is going to be, you know, the 7 of you coming together and kind of figuring out what is a shared or at least majority comfort level with how we move forward. So the projects that we have grouped that we think are good candidates for consideration of a bond referendum, potentially as early as 2022, but could be later if you desired. The first category is what we're calling side paths, multi-use paths, and walkways. So first one is sidewalk gaps. You have heard from Susan Woolard and Dana Stujenki about the gaps that they have identified over town. They had identified some core improvements or you know, highest priority improvements that to do all of those in today's dollars is around $3 million. And if you said, let's take care of every sidewalk gap in town, you're looking at something closer to 27 million. Again, today's dollars to fill in all of the gaps throughout town. So if you were interested in this type of project, you have flexibility in what size project you would want to put up, whether that was closer to the 3, closer to the 27, or somewhere in between. The Multiuse Downtown Loop is a concept that we have been working on for a couple of years. So this project is intended to create a multi-use path that really kind of circles the entire downtown area. So there are portions of it that are tourism eligible. We have been putting dollars towards it every year and making some headway on East Matthews Street. But there are other sections that take you down Fullwood and up towards 51 and then back towards the downtown area that are not tourism eligible. So the total expected budget for all legs, if you wanted to also relieve the tourism fund, is around $2 million. If you wanted to only fund the portions that are not tourism eligible, you're closer to $1 million for that project. The Highway 51 multi-use path is a project that we have committed to funding. The anticipated construction date is 2027. That is for consideration by NCDOT, so that date may change, but if it holds, that is a fairly large contribution that we will have to provide for that project. That if we are pursuing a bond package for this type of project, it may make sense to include that with the package to go ahead and have the funds to make that payment. If you didn't want to include it, or we did not pursue this type of a bond, then we would have a couple of years to figure out alternative funding to make sure that we can make that payment when it does come due. 4 Mile Creek Greenway. This would be extending from the tunnel underneath Trade Street west towards the city of Charlotte. So the anticipated cost in today's dollars is around $3 million. There is no alternative funding source. This is the kind of project that it is possible that the county would come in at some point and fund, but they have their own CIP, and this is currently not in it in any time in the foreseeable future. So if we wanted to make headway on that project, that would be another one to consider packaging in this area. We do have some cost share betterments coming due with the portions of the John Street widening project that are currently underway. $500,000 was a placeholder that we were provided, but we do not know the exact amount that we will be expected to pay for that. And the timing is also slightly unclear at this point. But again, something that if we're pursuing, it may be helpful to include that in a package.
Becky, I have a question.
Yep, sure.
So, if we pass a bond for a certain amount of money, what happens, what, I guess, protections are in place if, we see inflation continuing and prices go up and we are way over the dollar amount what it takes to build one of these? What can we do to be protected, I guess?
Great question. So, and that is one that is scary for us, right? So what we have seen other communities do is certainly undergo some professional cost estimating before we would put forward an official number. Susan Wooler does a great job and uses some NCDOT calculators for that, but really honing in and trying to do as much due diligence as possible would be step number one. Step number two that we've seen some other communities follow is let's say we wanted to say $20 million for greenways and sidewalks. So that is what we're advertising. That's the public information. We would focus on the highest priority projects that the board wanted to see. So if the board decided, we really want to knock out that 4 Mile Creek Greenway and we want to close our sidewalk gaps and we want to do the downtown loop, let's say those totaled, we think actually $15 million. We're asking for 20 to build in hopefully enough room for inflation with those professional cost estimates. And then what we can do with that remaining 5 million, if everything came in on budget, is you could do additional projects that fall within the same category. So you could end up completing some of the other projects on the list that weren't part of what we were advertising. So essentially you're under promising and then over delivering. But then if the cost escalations ended up eating into that 5 million, we're still delivering the project that we promised to the community. We're just spending our advertising dollars focusing on those top projects, and hopefully there will be left over to do even more, is probably the most effective thing that we have come across in doing research and how other communities are communicating what that bond will actually provide to their community.
Thank you.
Thanks. So the next category, Commissioner Whitley referenced this, are some road improvement projects. So these are projects that some of you may be familiar with. We have updated the numbers as the numbers were updated effective September of 21. So they have a few months of age on them, but they were updated not too long ago. Again, we would want to refine these, but it at least provides a ballpark for the board to start to understand scale and scope of what might be able to be accomplished depending on how much you wanted to put forward. So West Charles Street and Lois Street improvements. This is road widening, road improvements, curb, gutter, sidewalk along those areas. So those roads are currently not up to standard. Greylock Bridge extension. So as you'll recall, segments A and B are being funded through some NCDOT dollars. But C and D, that takes the road past Tanktown towards the future Independence Point Parkway. There's currently no funding for that roadway. But with the other portions already funded, it does significantly bring down that cost compared to how much it was going to cost the town originally. BB&T alley improvements, this is next to the BB&T off of Trade Street. So making that more of a formal roadway to be able to provide an additional way through downtown. And I believe there was also some striping for a pedestrian walkway through there to just make that a bit more of a formal drive. Andrew Caroline Drive extension portion of the right-of-way has been donated for this, but this would extend behind the Multiuse Medical Group building and would come out on East Matthews Street. So there is no funding for that, but we are looking at, again, alternatives for how to more effectively be able to traverse through our downtown area. And then the East Charles Street Crestdale Road Railroad crossing improvements. There are two different design options. So that is why there is two different numbers, obviously large difference in scale. One is essentially asphalt only. The other one is an actual raising of the entire roadway. And obviously you end up with a fairly significant difference in cost. These are fairly newly updated numbers that engineering was able to provide.
Hey, Becky.
Yes.
That 1.5 million, would that be including a bigger tunnel underneath the road where the water runoff from Matthew Chapel Road under the railroad track on Charles Street?
I would have to defer to Susan on the exact drainage, but I know that it was kind of the full kit and caboodle was how she described it, was kind of raising that entire roadway. So I don't want to presume, but I would presume that would include some drainage improvements.
All right. So, but if I'm looking at it right, if they just raised the street right there at Charles and Crestdale is 250,000. Is that correct?
That sounded like it was more just some repaving and just a little bit kind of the bare minimum work that could be done on it. I can pull up the email as the board talks about this later. I can pull that up. Susan did provide me with some information. So
I know when we talked about it last time, we were talking about raising that Charles Street up because that's where the problem is, not Crestdale, but it's Charles Street right there across. And I think that time it was somewhere in that same neighborhood. But I'm in favor of that along with the whole raising up down in that valley and bring it up there. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Becky, before you push off, this segment of road improvements is plus or minus $10 million. Under the path sidewalks, multi-use paths, what was that agglomerate number?
Let's see.
I know you had 27 million in there, but I'm kind of ignoring the 27 million. So you got 3 and 2 is 5, 5.7, 8.7. So let's say another $9 to $10 million.
Yes.
What's $1 million between friends? Nobody. All right. 9, 10 million. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So the next area is park improvements. The big one that has been discussed by the board previously is Purser-Halsey Park. We have heard ranges anywhere from $5 to as much as $8 million. I think the work that we would want to make sure that is done is making sure that the vision for the park is understood, and we would want to certainly have visuals to provide to the community for them to understand what would go into that park. I know that there's been some discussion by previous boards with differing opinions on what they would like to see contained within the park. We have, of course, already funded the dog park. And there are some trails that have been put in there through volunteer labor predominantly. But that would be a big needle mover on the park improvement side. But there are other park improvements that if the board wanted to consider, I know Corey would be elated to be able to pull together some lists or visuals of what else could go into our other parks. You know, sort of like a lot of these, it's really as big or as small as the board might desire to see it. So we hear very frequently that our community would like to see bathroom facilities in our parks that don't currently have them. An all abilities playground has been discussed before to provide greater access to play for some of our community that may not have quite the same abilities to go on a regular playground. Do we want to completely revamp our playgrounds? I know that there's some grading work that needs to be done at Squirrel Lake. So, you know, we can group all of those things into a parks bond, but to make sure that we are effectively demonstrating to the community what would go into that, we would certainly need to work very quickly to understand what the board's either comfort level was with a budget or what are some of the projects within our parks that you would like to see so that we could move forward. Veterans Memorial Park has the ability to be funded with some tourism dollars. So it's not on this list, but if the board wanted to not use tourism dollars for that, that would be an option. There had been some talk previously about other improvements to Stumptown Park, but perhaps those have been paused a little bit with some of the discussion about maybe having a different location for a core downtown park if that were to come to pass. So, you know, again, this is as involved or not as you want to make it. I think just understanding is that an area that the board would like to pursue is sort of the first step that we would be looking for. Downtown improvements, there was a streetscape design that was put together that has a broad brushstroke cost of approximately $3 million. You know, bluntly, this is the kind of project that we don't have other funding for it, but I'm not sure that it gets the community excited. So especially when we're looking at some of the other projects. So it's one that we do anticipate we would probably need a bond for at some point, but given some of the other things that we're talking about, you know, we put it on this list, but I'm not sure that we feel as strongly about it as some of the others. And then the other components of the downtown mobility study would also be something that could be funded through a bond. The sidewalk connections that are recommended within that study would be a part of that 27 million that is in the previous section, but there are other suggestions within that study related to parking improvements and some other improvements to the downtown area to get people around as efficiently as possible. So that would be something that it's really what projects the board might like to see from that study, and then we would be costing those out to determine a budget for it or determine how big the budget would need to be. And the last area is affordable housing. This did come up the other day as far as the board has committed the 1.5 million, potentially more than that, of the ARPA funds to affordable housing. We do have the housing study that is going to be undertaken this year. But then sort of where do we go from here? So what is the board's desire to see ongoing and sustainable funding for affordable housing? A bond referendum is one mechanism that you could consider if you wanted to. But like so many of these others, that might be more for a one-time project. If there's, you know, we need $10 million to do X, because once you did execute those bonds and spent the dollars, you're going to be paying them back for a long amount of time. And we no longer have annual funding for an ongoing affordable housing program. You kind of got it in that one fell swoop with the project. So a lot of it is really going to come down to what does the board want to see as far as affordable housing in Matthews. If you're looking for ongoing annual funding, you might be considering more just a tax increase with a dedicated funding line, as opposed to a referendum that would be more project specific. And so certainly if the board wants to see that on a 2022 bond referendum, we will do our darndest to get that on there. But the reality of when that housing study is going to come back and when decisions need to be made about a 2022 bond referendum, perhaps that is something to look at for a 2023 bond referendum or something like that. So we wanted to put it on there because we do know that other communities are using the bond referendum process for some of their affordable housing projects. But whether or not it's the right time or the board is interested in doing that is certainly up to you all.
I have a technical question.
Yes.
If we go to the voters with a bond referendum, a number of questions involved. First of all, in the bond referendum, do you specify to the voter what the percentage rate is of the bond? And secondly, if you decide to issue the bond in tranches, would the subsequent tranches be obligated to that interest rate? And the reason why I'm asking this is because of the low interest rates right now. Let's pretend we went out with a 1.5% bond, and we decided that the second tranche was going to be 4 years from now. And when the interest rate was at 7 or 8%, we'd have to sell those bonds at a discount in order to sell them. So those are, if I could have answers to that, it doesn't necessarily have to be now, but in preparation for the planning conference.
Sure. And I just want to make sure that I'm clear on the first question. When you said what percent rate, are you talking about the bond referendum question? Does it specify the anticipated interest rate of the bond?
The rate,
within?
Yeah, the rate of return on the bond. Does that have to be specified? And so, secondly, the second part of that is if you decide to issue the bonds in tranches, are future tranches obligated to that rate of return?
Sure. So I can take a stab at it and we can double check. I'm correct, but my understanding would be that we do not specify the interest rate in that bond referendum question. You specify the category of project and the total dollar amount that you are looking to have for that group of projects. The interest rate is not a part of the ballot question. It is left off of there. And then the interest rate is only locked in when you go to actually sell the bonds. So to your point, if the interest rate changes in the future, you may not have the advantage that you did if you took out that debt at a different time.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So we do have other projects that we do not recommend for a bond referendum, but we wanted to bring them to your attention because certainly it is the will of the board with how you would like to proceed. This number is lower. So
Becky,
yes.
Before
Yes.
you go further, what you just showed us on the bond representative, all of those categories,
Yes.
how many $1 million did that come up to, all those categories? And I know may not list all of them, but just what you shown us right there. Did you have a total figure for that?
So I didn't total it up. Are you willing to go the full amount on the sidewalks?
Yeah, no.
Let's just do the top numbers.
Okay, so you're at 29.
About 30 million bucks.
3.
And that would include the top numbers.
So this is about 35 million up here with the top numbers. And then you've got, let me do some quick math, hold on.
The road improvements was about 10 million.
Okay.
Real close.
And then if you went with just this 5 for the parks, and then 3, and then, this would be whatever the board wanted to see. So just what has numbers attached to it, you are at about $53 million.
Okay. All right, thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
And Becky, all of those would have to be separate votes. We couldn't, so that'd be how many different questions on the ballot, I guess.
Yes. So that's why they're grouped this way. So you would have, say for this, you would have one question related to, call it walkways. And you would have another question related to road improvements. And then you would have another question related to park improvements, downtown improvements, and affordable housing. So you're looking at, 5, if you wanted to pursue every single one of these categories, you would be looking at 5 separate questions. Our recommendation would be to not ask 5 separate questions, to really prioritize which groupings you are most interested in pursuing, so as to not overwhelm the voter, or for them to feel like, this just adds up to more than they're comfortable with. And so you end up with split votes where, these people voted for these 2 and these people voted for these others, and you ended up with none of them passing.
Yeah, that was my concerns. We, need to keep it smaller, make the voters feel more comfortable. We want them to pass.
I have one more question. Did I miss about the police and fire public safety? Was that in there or not in a bond referendum?
It is not on this list. So it is on the projects not recommended for a bond referendum. And I will skip down to that to talk about it for just a minute.
Yeah, Larry, if it's important to you, you don't put it on a bond. So if you're trying to support public safety with equipment and capital improvements and a fire station, the bond goes down in flames, you're done. So
I
you
follow
want those things.
I follow what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have a question, Gina?
Well, I was just looking at, I think you just answered it, because I was thinking, wasn't the fire station considered to be covered by the ARPA? And I just see that now. Okay.
Yeah. So just like John said, this is a great example of incredibly important. I think it would sail through a bond referendum process, but it's never a guarantee. And if it were to fail, the need is still there. And so where we recommend the board focus is on projects that are important, that improve our community. But if the voters decided that they weren't right and they didn't want to support them, we're not left with a deficiency in being able to provide a core service. And so that's where we think that there are other funding mechanisms that are more appropriate for a fire station than a bond referendum. So certainly it is up to the board, but this is our recommendation at this time. But we do think that there is a path using the ARPA funds, which could be a win-win, where we are avoiding the debt service and being able to provide that facility without having to go through any kind of financing process.
That makes sense.
So just a few others that we are not recommending. The project that we have heard so much about, the US 74 widening, this is kind of a tricky one because the town has committed to this funding. And at the time that the commitment was made, it's approximately $5 million, which is obviously a massive amount of money that we don't just have sitting around waiting for this. But we have a couple things that drive us to not recommend it. The first one is the timing has just kind of been completely blown up, and we don't want to be asking a bond question when it is quite possible that when those funds would be due would be outside of the eligibility timing for a bond. So if we put a bond up in 22 and the project isn't built for 12 years, the bond has expired. Additionally, kind of like the fire station, we have committed to this funding. So if the voters were to turn it down, we have already made that commitment to NCDOT. And so it really puts the board in a difficult position if the voters have said no, and then you have to turn around and fund it anyways because we've made that obligation. So we do know that that is a large number. It's possible that some different applications of NCDOT calculations for how they determine cost share are going to play in our favor and significantly reduce that number. We're just way too early in the process to know. So there's just too much unknown to put it in the grouping at this point in time. The Emergency Operations Center, it's a relatively small amount. We are hoping that we can get this funded in next year's budget. With those pressures that we know are coming on the budget, it is questionable. This is something that we think would be great for consideration of the ARPA funds to go ahead and knock it out and cross it off the list without having it put pressure on the general fund. But we know that that is a conversation for a different day.
Where are we going to locate that at, Becky?
That would be at the police department.
Okay, if it's up on the second floor?
You got it.
Okay, I got you.
So additional park improvements, some of these are small movers, but we do think that there are maybe some other dollars for them. Potentially Windsor Run funds could be used for some of the small playground improvements, pocket park construction. The park property at the corner of Pleasant Plains and McKee could be funded with Windsor Run dollars. So we, if these were all lumped together with additional park improvements, or if there were dollars left over in a park bond, we would love to knock these out. Otherwise, for the most part, with the other funding sources or the smaller dollar amounts, we think that they can probably be fit in over time through our general fund. And these are projects that right now we are suggesting be pursued at a later date. So maybe a bond package in 6 or 7 years, maybe 10 years, depending on some of the timing. But we do know that we will have some cost share coming with some NCDOT projects. Again, with all of their timing being up in the air, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to include them at this time. The numbers are also subject to change, so we just don't have enough information to have it make sense. And then again, that timing is not going to play in our favor for a 2022 question. And then there are some additional greenways and multi-use paths that when this was ranked by a previous board, so 5 of you have previously ranked these projects. They either didn't score really well or they just didn't rise to the level that some of the others did. Certainly, if you had money left over in a multi-use path greenway bond package, we could absolutely knock these out. Or if you say, hey, no, we like that project, we want to lift it back up and put it with those others, we are happy to move those off of this list. But they sit here at this point in time. Additional projects that we think just don't quite make sense right now would be some of the improvements to Rice Road Park. This is really more of the curb and gutter and the road improvements that we did not complete when Rice Road Park was originally opened. And then the parking lot under parking facilities. We would love to see that built, but we're just not sure because it might fit into a downtown improvements question. Otherwise, it would have to be a standalone question. That dollar amount on its own is really too small to make a bond an effective funding tool for that. So, so our intention with these projects is that between now and the planning conference, we will be sending out this list to you all to complete a ranking exercise. Some of you are familiar with that process, but Commissioner Hoover and Commissioner Tufano, the intention is to have you force rank the projects as far as what's your highest priority to your lowest priority. We're able to combine those, and then it just helps facilitate a conversation to understand what starts rising to the top where there is majority support or majority priority versus what might there be consensus on that it's just not the right time, it's not the right funding tool for a project. So you can kind of forget about those and not focus on them as far as how you might want to move forward. So that will be a homework assignment for you in the coming weeks. Commissioner Tofano, I know you mentioned a couple of additional projects that are not on the list. So we will have to figure out what makes sense with those. I know the police facility as an example. I know that something like that is certainly music to Chief Bennington's ears. It's not something that we have thus far identified as being an immediate need, so much as something that would be coming in future years. So I think at least the prior conversations had been, can we knock out some of the things that we have already identified and then be looking to take on projects like that a little bit further down the road. But certainly it's the will of the board. So with that, the floor is open if y'all want to discuss any of this now, if there is direction you want to give us, if there is additional information. We want the planning conference to be as productive as possible. So certainly being able to bring forward the information that you all feel will be best suited to be able to hopefully start to coalesce and make some decisions. We would be happy to help with any of that right now or take furious notes to get to work over the next 4 weeks.
Well, Becky, I'll jump in because I've been here before with the other bonds and all. And I think the simplest thing is keep it simple. So 2 questions is probably as much as the public can bear. And then 2, I'll say the word diametrically opposed questions is probably good, because if you're talking about parks and greenways and paths, that might be favorable to one group where another group might want infrastructure. So my buckets are the infrastructure and the park side of things. I guess the real question is it path, sidewalks, and multi-use paths versus road improvements? And I'd be up to discussion on that one. I think maybe road improvements is probably more important. And then that would be the infrastructure bucket. And then the other bucket is the parks improvement greenway bucket, so to speak. And I think if you're in that $5 to $10 million range for each bucket, those numbers are fairly palatable as a whole. So if someone wanted to vote for both of them, you're probably talking, based on your charts, probably 3 cents and maybe a penny and a half for each bond from that standpoint. So that's based on what we've done in the past and how I see the buckets. That would be my 2 cents in this conversation.
I'll jump in. I definitely agree with staff on things that we shouldn't put up for a bond. I don't want to have any unnecessary risks. I'm in pretty good agreement with you, John. I think parks is super important. I want to get those funded, and I think those would do really well in a bond. And then some part of the infrastructure. Again, I'm open to either the sidewalks or the street improvements. I think we can have more of a debate on that later, but I think those 2 buckets are really good, and that's where I stand on that.
Okay, I guess I'll chime. I'm pretty much. I think I gave mine, but I understand about public safety. And I understand. I think we can do that through some other funding to make sure we get Station 3 built and take care of our police departments. But number one, I just believe that when people see infrastructure and parks in that order, I will put infrastructure first and then put parks second, if that's what we're going to put on a bond referendum. And then maybe some subcategories, that we want to highlight. But I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Ken that those that you didn't put on there, we don't need to waste those. Just make sure we find the funds somewhere to regular fund the other projects as well too. So, but I'm in line with what John was sharing as well too.
And one thing that we'll work to clarify for the planning conference is it possible that the sidewalks or the multi-use paths, can they be lumped in? Can a greenway go with parks? Can a sidewalk go with roads? Or does that have to be called out as a completely separate category? But if there's a way to meld them, if there's interest for kind of all three, but is there a way to get them into two questions? We're certainly happy to push on that and see just how narrowly we have to keep that question in order to keep ourselves legal.
If you could figure that out, I could buy into that much easier, because the sidewalk for the pedestrian, the road improvement for the vehicle, the multi-use path, that would be a really nice way of packaging it up so everybody gets a little bit out of that deal.
Becky, I did have a question. You mentioned that the town could do advertising, not in sway one way or the other. What does that cost look like to kind of advertise a bond? What is it, going to be on us?
That's a really good question. I don't have that answer for you tonight. Certainly we have at our disposal our website, our social media platforms. Those are free unless we do some of the promotion through the social media platforms, which is really kind of relatively low cost at the end of the day. I think where you end up with the highest cost is if you start getting into advertisements in the newspaper. There are other communities that will do a mailer to every residential and business address in their community. I would love to see us do that. So you've got the cost of printing, postage. I'm sure we could probably do the design in-house. But where all of our literature has to be very neutral, think just very informative. The board is able to personally advocate. So a board member can say, vote yes, or if you're not in support, vote no. But all of ours just has to be pure public information, so nothing persuasive. So we will make sure Teresa and I both sat through that class, and there's a lot of great examples of what to not do that crosses the line, as well as how to effectively meet that requirement in the state statute. So we feel like we'll be very careful, but we feel like we've got some good parameters for how to make sure that we meet that. But I think print materials is probably going to be the most that you'd be looking at. But if the board would support that, I think that's, we rarely do that, but I think at the end of the day, that is still the most effective way to try to get that information in front of our citizens. But we can hold information meetings with existing town staff. That's just opening up our doors, creating some visuals. So we can put in a lot of effort that is just going to be more sweat equity than something that actually hits a budget. But we would prepare that if the board gives us a green light in short order. We would be preparing that very quickly to be able to bring that back to you to understand what that entire communications campaign would look like and consist of.
Thank you.
Ken, the other thing I would add is some communities do form, like, I don't know, Citizens for a Better Multiuse, and they will actively, and you see that in Charlotte, right? They're saying vote yes, but those aren't public dollars that are saying advocating one way or the other for a bond referendum. But there are communities that put together private citizens groups that will advocate for bonds.
Any other feedback from any of you regarding where we should focus our efforts for the 28th or the 26th and 27th, I think it is, of February?
So sounds like to me, oh, somebody's got a question.
Yeah, no, this is Renee. I was just going to say, I think all along we've really been talking about potentially doing a bond for roads, sidewalks, the fire station, and parks. And I feel pretty sure we can find another way to fund the fire department or the fire station. And and recognize the importance of not putting that up to a vote. So I too support those 3 categories of looking into, and also want to emphasize the importance of getting a good idea of how much mailers will cost. Since COVID has hit, I think it's been more obvious how lack of access to internet, creates big divides, and it would be important to have that print material.
So we'll talk about this tomorrow. But the way I see it is our intention will be to give you all a list of projects and the estimated costs. And then some of you all may have heard, and know where, I don't, use an example, you have a mental map of it, but a lot of us don't. So with each project, we'll have some kind of printed material, and we'll go over that to make sure everybody understands it, and have y'all vote on, okay, where would you like to see, so we can focus the discussion. And then in my mind, at least, you parcel it out. Okay, should this be ARPA funds? Should this be a bond? Should this be absorbed through the general fund of, regular tax rate? And really have that discussion, hopefully reaching consensus at the planning conference. And then, with the amount and what categories y'all would like to pursue. And then we can, take it to the next step. And at some point, we'll get the local government commission, LGC, involved to take it to the next step. But we'll also, as part of the discussion at the end of the month, we'll show estimated tax rate increases based on, let's say, $20 million worth of bonds or $10 million worth of bonds. So everybody can at least absorb in their heads what kind of impact it would have on the tax rate.
Well, that is it as far as our prepared information. So we are happy to discuss more, but if you all feel like we're in a good place, that is the end of the formal preparations for tonight.
I appreciate all the work you put into this. It was very informative. I think you guys have some good direction on where we're leaning towards, and I think hopefully we'll come to a unanimous conclusion at the planning conference to get this moving forward.
Sure. And I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Gina.
I was just going to ask Hazen, this is kind of a different subject. Could you get back with me on why our quick ratio has gone down?
Yes. So what we're going to do at the, Teresa, you're talking about on the state's financial stuff. So we're going to either do that on the 14th, because we're going to have the audit report on the 14th. We'll do it either the 14th or the 28th. Teresa, did we decide which date we were going to do that?
Okay.
I think we decided the 28th.
All right, is that okay on the 28th, or do you want it before then?
No, that's fine. I was just curious why it's gone down.
Okay.
Becky, my ask is, the board members are going to look at their lists and compile them. We'll talk about the planning conference. Can I ask between you and Teresa and Hazen, if he wants to participate, is to put your ask or how you would align it, put it in the magic manila envelope, and we'll unseal it after the board goes over theirs, and as a comparison to sort of see how you guys would tack versus where the board would tack.
We would be happy to. And if other questions come up, it's a lot to absorb. There's a lot of different moving parts to this. So if other questions come up over the next few weeks that we can, help prepare to make a fruitful discussion at the planning conference, please go ahead and send those to Hazen, and he'll make sure that they get to the right folks. We welcome that. We want we want to be able to bring everything as complete as possible to that, to really help, hopefully be able to come to some conclusions and decisions at that time. So don't be shy, but this is new for all of us. So some of it may require some hunting down of the information, and we welcome the opportunity to do that. So at the end of the day, this is really exciting. We've been looking at some of these CIP projects for a long time, and perhaps being able to put them forth to the community to see if they want to move forward with funding them. We are very excited to be able to help support that process and hopefully be successful with it. So really just let us know what we can provide for each of you and for the group. And we look forward to continuing the conversation here in another month's time.
Thank you so much, Becky. I guess, Hazen, that was what we had for tonight. So we're good to
Yes, sir.
adjourn if everyone's ready to. We don't need a motion to adjourn, do we, Lori?
You should have one. Take the roll.
Okay. Someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Whitley, seconded by Commissioner Urban. We'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hoover,
Yes.
Commissioner Urban,
Yes.
Commissioner Whitley,
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Tofano,
Yes.
Commissioner Garner.
Yes.
I vote yes as well, so that passes unanimously. Have a good night. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, staff. You did a good job.